Steve has been called the king of clarity, helping make people's communications more effective, more efficient, and leading to great outcomes. Hi, welcome to this episode of Learning for Learning Leaders. And today I'm so excited to have old friend with me, Steve Woodruff. Steve is author of two books. One is Clarity Wins, and the other has just come out. It's called The Point, and it provides really good information about how your communications can be clear and, to the point. So let's hear what Steve has to say. I think he's going to be a very interesting, very thought-provoking discussion about something as simple and as complicated as communication. All right, Steve, great to have you with us. I'm so excited to learn more about your new book and more about clarity. So could you just start by giving us a little bit of a background of yourself?
You're always tempted to say I was born at an early age, but you knew that.
Right.
So I grew up in Connecticut, but I went to school down in Nashville at Vanderbilt, where I majored in psychology once I understood that physics and calculus was not going to be my strong suit. I was interested in astronomy, but I didn't realize astronomy is all math. Whoops. But I've always been fascinated with how the human mind works, and I did some graduate study work toward teaching and preaching. And so communication and the human brain have always been interesting to me. And when I went into business in my 20s, in sales and marketing of medical equipment, that's when I had to start learning, all right, how do you become persuasive? How do you get attention? How do you communicate, with people over phone, fax? Back then, it was even before fax machine, for crying out loud.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so I've been through the whole cycle of everything from, fax machines to Twitter and everything beyond. And it just became clear to me that there was an art to getting your point across to people. And I had to learn that somehow by doing, by selling, by marketing, by writing. So that's what I have done for 40 plus years, is in the trenches, learning how to craft words in order to gain attention, persuade, help people understand, teach. It's been quite a trip.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
that's fascinating because, a lot of us have to, everybody has to communicate, right? Everybody has to, if you're in a sales situation, you've got to communicate your message if you're writing a blog. So, but you have had a level of self-awareness that a lot of people I don't think have, right?
Mhm.
We've all met, you meet all the time people that are not the best communicators, and they're probably doing similar things, but they didn't have that self-reflection. So where did that come from? Where did that kind of looking at yourself and saying, oh, I'm assuming you say, hey, I need to be a better communicator. I need to be more clear. Like, how did you develop that self-awareness?
Part of that's just my wiring. I have incredibly analytical wiring, so I have always been that way. Sometimes it's a good trait, and sometimes it's not a great trait. Actually, I've had dealings with depression over many months and years just because I can get too inward. But the self-awareness piece has always been just part of my wiring. And once I got into the work world, I really started to struggle. What am I good at? What should I be doing? And I wasn't going to just drift. I really wanted to figure stuff out. And the strain I was in a sales position, and I didn't really like sales. I just, I did it, but
Uh-huh.
it kind of felt creepy. And it wasn't until I got through the Strengths Finder package and started to look at who I really was, and it began to dawn on me. Holy cow, this is really important to put words around attributes and characteristics and have that self-awareness joined to clear language. So that started me on my quest of trying to gain personal, professional clarity. And also, because I'm a branding guy, I just love branding. I began to realize that when it comes to saying the right things, branding, you've got to have that base of what is it you're trying to say? What's the core? Who are you really as a company or an individual? And then how do you say it in a way that gets into people's head? And I've been working on those two fronts together with myself, with others, with companies for many, many years. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating, and it makes me think. You were doing self branding before like self branding was a thing, right?
Yeah, the term personal branding kind of showed up when I was beginning to wrestle with it. It didn't even have a term for a long time. There was no such, and I still don't love that term actually, only because it's easily misunderstood. I talk about people having a professional value statement
Ah,
because
okay.
what we're really doing with personal branding is we are saying, here's my value to the marketplace. And whether it's to an employer or whether it's to a customer or whatever, we've got to grasp who we are in order to project that forward to people and in order to direct our lives in a
Mhm.
good direction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's so important to think about what value we're adding or where we're seeking value, right? Seeking value with family or friends or in the organization. And I think I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I think a lot of this not wanting to return to work has to do with what's the real value that the company's offering in being face to face, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. Yeah, we could do a whole other segment on that. But I want to get back to you've been talking about clarity for all of these years, and that's a message that I think resonates with a lot of people. But in leadership and learning and development, where do you think the really need or desire or advantage would be to focusing in on this thing called clarity? And maybe you could even talk a little bit of like, I mean, it's the name of your company, it's what you do, but what does that really mean? I mean, we think we know what it means, but what do you mean by clarity?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Carl, because I've been talking about it for many, many years. And a few months ago, I realized I had never actually articulated exactly what I mean by clarity as I was preparing this last book. And so I had to go back and write it down because I just figured everybody knows what I'm talking about and I know what I'm talking about. Well, actually, you know what? One of the things I say is you got to define your terms. You can't assume anything. So for me, clarity means, and it's got several dimensions, but when it comes to a person that's in business or seeking to just direct their life forward, clarity means having a good grasp of where you should be going. It's having a roadmap that says, here's who I am, here's where I need to go, here's where I can add value. And many people do not have it, even if they've been in a great job and been successful for years and they've gone up the ladder. And all of a sudden, maybe they get laid off and they realize, I don't, I don't even know who I am. I don't know where I'm going. And I've seen that over and over again. So many times we actually need help from other people to gain clarity because you can't read the label of the jar you're in. So we have a very subjective understanding of ourselves. And many times we don't have a good grasp of who we are. So it's always helpful to find one or more people that can help us gain that clarity. Then, as a leader and as a trainer or a teacher, you've also got to be able to let people know, where are we going? What's the destination here? What am I trying to shape you into? What's the shift we're looking for? What's the mental shift? What's the action shift? And if a trainer or a leader is not clear on expectations and destination, then the people they're trying to lead are going to be just confused and demotivated and not know where they're going. So, one of the biggest faults in leaders is just simply leaving expectations vague and foggy and undocumented so that people don't know what success looks like.
Yeah,
Eas-
that's so. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Easily fixed problem, but man, that's a problem. It's just too easy to assume everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. You've got to be incredibly plain and specific if you want people to know what you're expecting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I just had this conversation the other day with somebody. It seems like almost the larger the organization, the less clear what I should be doing. Like
Yeah.
I think of Facebook where they said, "Hey, we had these I read an article where managers like I didn't even know what to do." Like or Google or one of those places. Like I came into work and it wasn't clear how what I was doing every day was related in any way to the goals of the company. And I
Yeah.
find that unfortunately, and I'm sure you do too, in large organizations.
Well, you know what? It actually goes a layer before that because before that person gets in their job, they're hired based on a job description that's usually a bunch of generalities and jargon and fluff and fog. And so many times the actual role is not at all well articulated. Then you stick somebody in there, and whoever's managing or leading isn't also being clear and specific. And of course, people are lost. And of course, they're unmotivated. And it's not necessarily that anybody's a bad person. It's just that it's not clear what's going on and what the expectations are. And that is something that every leader in any role has got to fix. And it comes all the way down to parenting. It comes down to every part of life. I mean, you can't lead your kids without being specific, without having clear statements, without telling stories, without telling them what the stakes are. All these things are part of putting the light on in people's minds.
Yeah, that's it's so important. But so like we talk about it in learning and development often. Behaviorally defining what you want to do, and in academic research we say operationally defining your terms, which means exactly what you want. But so it's a problem.
Yeah, you know what, Carl, if I might just jump in. Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Operationally defining your terms. Get to the point.
Right.
In other words.
Right.
We use this fluffy stuff. I know what you mean. You know what you mean.
Well, in academia,
but, it's get to the point. And that's what we got to do. Speak plainly about what we're looking to do.
So, but why? So my next question really was, why is that so hard? Like, we kind of all know that, like, I think instinctively, but why do we create these terms like operationally defined, or why do leaders not clearly articulate what they want, or tell me what they like? What do you think are some of the barriers that we put up for ourselves?
I think some of it's just plain laziness, okay? Irresponsible laziness. But some of it is that we have a corporate climate, where people are comfortable speaking in vague generalities. So we talk about, well, you have to align all the stakeholders around the business results that we're blah, 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 blah. And you start adopting this nonsense language. And we think we're communicating, but we're not. We're not communicating at all. And unfortunately, it just becomes part of the air we breathe in companies. And somebody's got to break the mold and just start being very plain and simple and straightforward. And those are the leaders that people follow. People, they can't follow fog. You can't please vagueness. And so when somebody knows where they're going and somebody gives a clear vision, that's when we're going to actually have people follow. But people aren't trained to be plain. They're trained to be obscure. And my goal, my passion is to train people to be plain. You can do it. It's not hard. You just got to apply it and realize the other way doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like that saying, if common sense was so common, then, and it's kind of that if clarity was so clear, or people would align to it, but it's not as simple as that. And that's why I think someone, with your insights and ideas to bring that to the attention of folks, I think is really important. And I think but in your book, which I have right here, which I highly recommend to anyone who is watching this, this is a fantastic book. It's very clear. It's very simple to read. It's research based. I noticed a bunch of references in here. So really, really good stuff. Obviously not written by ChatGPT. So hats off there.
That's for sure.
Right. I think eventually they're actually going to have to certify like written or not written by. But in here you have the Clarity Fuel Formula.
Yeah.
And it's a 4-step. Could you explain that a little bit and why that can help people overcome some of their clarity issues?
Well, one of the things that's driven me over the years is I've seen all these formulas. So there's a sales formula, there's a marketing formula, a coaching formula, all these acronyms and steps, and nobody can remember all that stuff. But they're applied to specific realms, and it's very fragmented. And I got this idea in my head that maybe there's one formula that is all of it. It's communication. All it's human communication. And the brain operates a certain way, whether it's sales or marketing or a TV ad or social media. And words are words. So couldn't there be that? So it took me years to hammer out the formula. And there's really 4 simple steps to it. First one sounds so obvious, but you'll understand exactly why it's there. The first one is you have to have a point.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, and I'm not talking about backyard conversations over the fence, just bantering. No,
Right.
most of our communications as professional are planned and purposeful. Well, if they're planned and purposeful, you have to have a point. And unless you can articulate where you're going, what the shift that you want in people's lives and behavior, you got no business trying to communicate. You're just spinning around and confusing people.
Right.
And so I give a very simple formula on how to define your point.
Mhm.
And then the second thing is you got to get to the point, which means that we only have a really short window to win attention. We know this. The attention spans are short. And if we don't know how to front load our communications with something interesting and relevant and that shows people immediately why they should tune in, they got a million other things to distract them. Everybody's got a smartphone. So if I'm giving a presentation, I had better get to some really interesting stuff in the first couple minutes, or I've lost. So you have to have a point. You have to get right to the point. And the third thing is you have to figure out how to get the point across so that what's in my head arrives in your head in the way I intend it. We can speak the same language, we can use the same words, but we may not have the same meaning. And in fact, we don't. We have a whole different constellation of definitions and ideas in each of our heads. So part of the book is 8 shortcuts, simplifiers that are to help you get the point across fast, stories and snippets and statistics or specifics and statements, the things that the human brain likes and latches onto and grab attention. And then the last thing, once you've gotten the point across, is the goal often, especially in businesses, you're trying to get everybody on the same page. We want to arrive at an agreement, at alignment, at a destination, at an action. And we can't leave that undefined and floating up in the air, especially in a meeting. You've got to summarize. So this sequence, and it's so simple, but it's so rarely done. You got to have a point, get right to the point, make sure you get the point across, and arrive at the same page, is the core formula for all forms of communication. Sales, coaching, writing, everything. That's the sequence. And the 8 shortcuts that all start with S, the stakes, the specifics, the side-by-sides, the stories. These are the brain-friendly things that turn our lights on quickly. People don't want to have a bunch of blathering gibberish and technology stuff. They want to hear the plain stuff. So if you can train yourself to use brain-friendly language in a brain-friendly sequence, you will win. And that's the point of that book.
Yeah, I mean that was that really resonated with me because again in learning and development, you there's a big push toward micro learning, and people are like, oh, we can't do micro learning, we have to tell them this and this and this. And if you ever talk to a subject matter expert, they're like, well, in order to plug in the computer, you've got to understand the history of electricity, and you're like, no, that doesn't really.
Yes.
What are you talking about, right? But that's exactly it. And then the other thing, which I really think, to go back to your first point, is so many people don't have a point, right? They call this meeting, and I'm like, what is the point of this meeting? Or what is the point? Like, I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten. I'm like, what? Like, I want to say, what do you want from me, right? That's what I want to know. Like, I can't understand from this email, and I'm a lot less inclined to respond to somebody when I don't even know what they want. Like, like, why are we having this conversation? Why are we having that? So to flip it on its head a little bit, do you have advice for people that are like, okay, I'm talking to somebody who's not clear and I want to get something clear. How do I elicit clear information from them when they're in this fog?
So the advice I give for people to immediately apply these principles is usually centered around email, as you brought it up. We all have to deal with email. We have dozens of them coming at us every day. And one of the changes I've made, when I was trained, educationally, you're trained to be logical, sequential, complete, and have a certain flow. But when it comes to business transactions and emails, I used to try to say too much in the email. I may have several points. I may not get right to the action item until the end, because isn't that how you're supposed to do it? Well, it turns out no. Email, people are making split-second judgments in a crowded, noisy inbox based on the first two lines, the subject line and the first sentence, the preview. So learning to do clarity means you got to take advantage of that visual real estate. You have to front load the action items, the expectations right there in the first part so that people know exactly what's expected. And then what I've done a lot in the last few years is I've now changed almost all my emails to be single topic. Yeah. One thing. I ask one thing, one time. I don't give four because, as you said, as soon as it's complicated, I'll put it off or I'll delete it.
Yeah.
So I will make most of my emails very, very short and with one ask, and I'll bring it right up, and total difference in replies. So the biggest temptation we all have as communicators is too much information. TMI is the killer of clarity. People don't want another haystack. Give me the needle. Right. And it's our job as communication designers to bring the needle forward and say, here's the point. You want more details? Fine. That's down here. Here's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And especially, again, when I think of learning leaders, right? And they need to help create instruction, but they also need to work with the organization. And I think a lot of times in L&D, we're not communicating to the organization in a language the organization understands. We're communicating in a language that we understand.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even call employees. We call them learners, right? Or trainees, which isn't the same language that anyone else in the organization uses. Like accountants don't call us beans, right? Because it's just really kind of interesting how unclear that happens to be. So,
you've touched on something that you understand. You're one of the few people that I can say the word metadata and you know what that means because you were involved in the early days of e-learning as I was. So metadata is information about information. It's the tags. It's hashtags. It's what we store in our heads that define things. And computers store information with metadata, and it's searched by metadata. Well, we have different mental metadata. We talked about this about getting the point across. Mm-hmm. I can't assume that if I use the word employee or resource or whatever, that you have the same. And I might use specialized training language that you don't have at all. It's called the curse of knowledge, where I assume you know what I know, and then I'm talking right past you. Right. And this is the call to simplify, because this happens all the time. This miscommunication in business happens not because we're being awful people. It's just that we get too used to saying things in tribal language, and we're not really then communicating with others. Yeah, we have our own bubble of communication, and then we assume everybody's in the same bubble, and they're not. And mm-hmm. even people in our same field aren't always in the same bubble, or our same organization are not always in our same bubble. So yeah, I think that's such a good point of getting down to the simple common denominator that people can then speak with each other and understand what each other is saying. I think that's so important and so often missed. Now, mm-hmm. I have so many other questions. So one, so when you first started probably going into organizations and saying, hey, you need to be more clear, you need to communicate better, what was their response? Were they like, yeah, come on, Steve, we got it. Well, what are you talking about? Or like, what was that like to kind of, you kind of created a niche for yourself as a leader in this space, but it could not have been easy. No, it's not. It started with branding challenges with small companies and branding. And a lot of times they feel the need because they want to succeed. And if they have a garbled message, if they don't have a good, clear offering. So I did a lot of short-term consulting with small companies, individual startups, consultants to try to get their message clear. But when it comes to internal comms, one of the things I saw through my experience in a couple vendor companies that I worked with is there were a lot of really bad training projects going on. And they were outsourcing to vendors, and there was real bad communication in project management because people weren't trained in the principles of clear communication in a project. And as you know, in the pharmaceutical industry where I've done a lot of work, they bring sales reps in to be trainers, and then they throw projects, training projects. They're not trained in operations. They're not trained in this. So I don't even like project management, but I created workshops on project and vendor management because it had to be done. Somebody had to do something, and so that's what began part of this process on the clarity of internal communications, not just marketing. Was I saw all this broken stuff between stakeholders, internal and external. And it's not rocket science to fix it. It's just here's how you make communication work. And so I did that, and then I just realized, well, this applies to email, this applies to presenting, this applies to everything. So it just kept getting broader into this package that's now the Clarity Fuel formula, which really applies to any role, any person, anywhere. It's the same rules and the same tools because the communication challenge is the same, no matter what we're doing.
Yeah, I love the fact that you were able to take a very specific element and boil it down to its essence. That's the definition of clarity, but so many people are not able to do that. They do things, and then you ask them to think outside of their niche or their lane or whatever, and they're not able to do that, even though if they boil down what they were doing, it could be much more scalable and much more applicable across a lot of different areas. So I think that's so important and such a great insight. And that leads me to kind of my next question. As a successful leader yourself and someone that teaches others to be clear and concise, what habits do you have or that you would recommend others? Lots of us want to write a book, but we haven't written books. Lots of us want to do workshops or consulting, but we haven't taken that next step. Lots of us want to move into leadership positions, influencer positions, if you will, that term. But anyway, so what are some of your habits or things that you do to help you stay focused on, being the leader that you are?
So I'll give you one of my practices that I feel is about the most powerful practice I ever advocate for people. We've all heard of storytelling and how powerful storytelling is because the human brain is wired for stories. And that's one of the things I talk about in illustrating Turning Lights On is you got to use stories. But I also believe that networking and connecting with people is really the biggest lever for success in your career or in anything, really. It's networking. How do you build those relationships with people? And I use something I call story asking. And it is exactly what it sounds like. When I'm talking with people, I'm kind of interviewing them. I'm just asking stories. I'll say, tell me your biggest success story. Tell me how you got from whatever you wrote in your high school yearbook to this job role. Everybody wants to tell their story. Everybody wants somebody to be interested in them. And I'm very curious. I love, love, love hearing stories. And so I just sit down and ask stories. And I build the closest bonds with people. They'll realize after an hour, they don't know anything about me. I've just been pulling their stuff out. But what you do when you do that is you start to get a feel for who this person is. And you can actually help them gain clarity about themselves just by being a sympathetic asker, just by saying, well, tell me what you mean by that. And I've been able to make a tremendous impact on people, sometimes in 30 minutes, just by asking a few questions, letting them talk and say, do you realize that if you took this attribute that you're doing and you just applied it over here, that it would do this? And they go, I never thought of that.
Wow. Yeah.
It's very powerful. So if you want to advance in any way in your career, become a story asker, become a great networker, and it will pay back in dividends just untold.
I love that term, story asker, because when you think about it, oftentimes people will say, network. Okay, well, what does that mean? Like,
Yep.
Okay, you got a network. Like, what does that mean? Like a network? I don't know what that means. And then sometimes people interpret that as like, oh, here I am, here's my card, here's what I do, that kind of stuff. But the story asking is such powerful. And the other thing that you do then is you're, this is sometimes a overused term too, but you're really actively listening. So
Yeah.
it's not just you're asking a question, somebody tells a story. You're saying, okay, oh, this piece fits with this, and this piece fits with that, and okay, if I help somebody put those two together, that's really an insight, a value, to get back to what we said before, a value to someone, because you have that kind of ability to one, ask the right questions in the story form, two, find those nuggets, and three, put those nuggets together. So I think that's really kind of a great skill set to recommend to anybody who is trying to network.
Well, part of that was I'm not a natural networker. I'm an introvert. I don't schmooze well. I don't like schmooze, big,
Mhm.
loud, noisy setting. I don't like them. And
Mhm.
so I felt that sort of inadequacy in networking until I realized that all I just got to do is be me. It's just my style. My style is to get with one person and just talk to them. So, okay, that's what I'll do. I'm not there to be throwing business cards into the wind. I'm there to have good interaction with one or two people.
Yeah,
And for introverts and for people that maybe lack confidence, you just embrace that, it's a real easy to do. You don't have to become the big mouth. All you have to do is know one question.
mhm.
Tell me how you got to this current role. That's the only question you got to know. Tell me how you got here. And when they start telling you, well, why did you start with that company? Oh, who did you know that did it? That all the other questions just keep coming very naturally. You do not have to change your personality. You just have to ask a few questions.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. And to go back to what you said about success, I often ask, when I start a consulting engagement, I'll say, so what does success look like to you? And the scary thing to me is people say, that's a good question. And
Hmm.
I want to say, that's not a good question. You should know the answer to that question. This is not a good question. This is a basic question. You should just,
Yeah.
so I think it's kind of interesting where people are do, and they don't step back to say, okay, well, what is success for me? What do I want to accomplish? And I think your questions that you did about, how did you become successful at what you're doing, I think is a really interesting way to kind of tap into almost what a goal is of someone,
Yeah.
or what their traits are, without saying, what are your goals and traits. I think that's a really good way to do that.
Well, if you happen to be an employee or somebody that's being led or managed by someone who's not real clear, you just take that question, you sit down to have coffee with your boss, you say, what does success look like for you as far as my role?
Hmm.
And drive to the specifics. Drive. If you're not getting specifics proactively, then dig for them.
Yeah.
Because it may be that the person that's supervising you hasn't really thought through what success looks like. And how can
Exactly.
you succeed if there's no target? And
Exactly.
so you have to be a little courageous and say, okay, well, let's define what success looks like. What
Right.
does what
And you
does
can't help them if they don't define it. I mean, so your job is, I would say, I mean, that's so good, because you would be at jeopardy, right? I'm at jeopardy because if I don't know how to help you, and you're my boss, and I'm just doing stuff, I could be doing the wrong stuff and not know it. And so then, that's managing your boss, managing your manager. But I could get in trouble, fired, let go, seen as expendable, if I'm not doing things that you think are supporting you. And if I don't ask you that, I never know. But that's so good. But I don't know. I think it's unfortunate probably how few people have that conversation.
Yeah, and it should be driven from the top down. It should be from leadership down. Well, let's face it, many times it's not. But one of the things that I emphasize is leaders. And I think leaders have to have extremely clear high level purposes, extremely clear role level purposes for their individuals, and individual purposes. And it has to be spelled out, summarized, written, you know, illustrated, so that I'm not asking that question. I know what success looks like. You've made it clear what success looks like. And now I have the opportunity to step into success instead of to feel always like, gee, I must be failing.
Right. It's almost like a work breakdown structure.
Mhm.
what you said, project management, but it's kind of like, here's my goal, here's my objectives, here's my sub objectives, or
Yeah.
here's my task, here's my subtasks, here's
Yeah.
what I need to do,
It's
and this
exactly
will
that.
lead to success.
Yeah. It's exactly that. The human mind needs summaries. We need summaries. And so the best thing you can do as a leader is to summarize in a tight body of a few bullet points. This is what I'm after, so that people are not confused and not just walking around in fog.
Right, or spinning their wheels, which I think happens a lot of times. I mean, yeah, I know people that have been in work situations and like, I don't know what to do all day. And if you've ever been in that situation, it's a worse day than if you're super busy.
Yeah.
Trying to
Oh,
kill time
absolutely.
is not fun. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
interesting. So what advice would you have for someone who's trying to transform from an individual contributor in their organization, maybe an instructional designer or a project manager or something, into a position of leadership within? How have you seen people use the clarity approach and the approaches that you put in your book and the clarity fuel formula to actually transition into a leadership role?
So a lot of that for me comes down to getting real clear on your strengths. So one of the most transformative things I ever did many, many years ago was go through Strengths Finder and to look at those attributes. And for me to this was very important for me because I was trying real hard to be a salesperson.
Mhm.
And I looked at all that and I realized in my mid 40s, I finally settled on what I am. I'm a consultant. I'm not a sale. I can sell, I can market, I can write, but my core identity is a consultant. That's where I'm going to flourish. And if I try to lead or be something else, I will fail. One reason I'm still a solopreneur after 17 years on my own, I'm still a solo because I learned in two prior positions that I don't like managing people.
Mhm.
I find it exhausting. I'm not a nasty guy. I just don't like it. I'm not.
You're not
I
at
got.
all.
I got to create. I'm a
I
contributor.
can
I'm a
attest to
doer. I'm a
that.
make it happen guy. I
Right.
don't want to manage.
Yeah.
Well, that's real important to know, you know?
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing someone can do that wants to move up is to go through those type of assessments and get a real good grasp of what their strong suit is. And if they have leadership capabilities, they need to find a type of role or a type of company or a type of team that's going to work for them. Not every type of person has a good makeup for every type of team.
Mhm.
And it's intelligently looking at those things and taking responsibility to say, here's what an ideal looks like for me. Now let's see if I can find that.
Yeah, no, that's so good. So, I kind of want to go back then, almost to a little bit. I talked about before about like your self awareness and getting to this point because a lot of people do that. Do you so I advise my students sometimes. I say, hey, take New Year's Eve and instead of going out, do an assessment of where you are, where you're going, that kind of stuff. Do you do, like a milestone assessment, or are you doing a little bit of where am I every day? Some people journal, some people. So what's your process for
Mm,
making sure that, I'm sure there was some reflection and finding out, hey, I really don't like to manage people. Some reflection on, hey, this is my skill set. Hey, I need to write this book. That kind of stuff.
yeah. I think it's a really good thing to go through maybe once a year. If you're not okay, so I'm overly reflective. I am overly aware, overly analytical. It's too much, but I know most people aren't. So to once a year to go through some sort of an assessment, either in a small group or individually or an online thing like StrengthsFinder or whatever, and to do that evaluation. Am I moving in the right direction? Am I really using my strengths? And it's if you can also find either a coach or a mentor or a friend or someone where you can bounce things off of, that's a huge, huge bit because no, we can't be objective about ourselves. So I'm going through right now a complete rebranding of my entire practice because things have changed. I have moved forward in some things, trimmed some things off. I need to change my messaging. And I am paying some branding and marketing specialists who are ripping me apart and putting me back together again. Why? I do that with others, but I can't do it for myself. I
Mhm.
get too confused. And so periodically, it's really a good thing to reevaluate and to get some outside input on what you could be doing and what you should be doing.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful advice, and especially like the fact that you say, hey, even though this is what I do, where I'm an expert, it's always good to have an objective third party view of it, even just to validate what you know, or to help sort through those kind of issues that we all have. Like you said, like I'm in my head a lot, wondering, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? So that's really helpful. So what I'd like to do then is just recommend everyone, to grab the book, to think about clarity, think about the point. A lot more detail in here, a lot of really good information, case studies, as I said, research in there. So this is wonderful. Steve, how could somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to talk to you, or they wanted to learn more about your services, or just follow your rebranding process?
The the website that I'm going to be centering everything on is going to be stevewoodruff.com. So I've had several websites and several brands over the time, and it is right now in the midst of being rebuilt. So even right now, if someone goes to stevewoodruff.com as of this date, August 24th or whatever it is, it's going to be out of date. But it will, in the next month and a half, be completely refreshed. And then I do most of my interacting through LinkedIn. So I write a lot of posts on LinkedIn. I have a weekly newsletter on LinkedIn. I've tried many different social avenues, and I'm a business author and consultant speaker. So LinkedIn's my thing. And so if somebody wants to find me on LinkedIn, you can look for Steve Woodruff and you'll see one of them that says King of Clarity in the middle of it. And that's obviously me.
Fantastic. All that'll be in the show notes as well, so people can look below and click on that and go right to Steve. So this is fantastic. Steve, this has been such a pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you like all day, but I know we both are busy. So thank you so much for your time.